I'm Sharon Squassoni, and I direct the Proliferation Prevention Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And I'm here today with Dr. Nobumasa Akiyama, who is professor at Hitotsubashi University. We're here at the International House of Japan. Nobu and I have been co-chairs of a project looking at the non-proliferation implications of Japan's fuel cycle decisions. So Nobu, can you give us a quick summary of where we are right now in terms of Japan's nuclear energy scenario and why these decisions are important?
Sure. 3 years ago, Fukushima nuclear accident happened, and with this, the Japanese nuclear energy program has been totally changed. And at this moment, we have only few reactors to be waited for the restart. So at this moment, we do not have the nuclear power. So then maybe in the near future, it is not likely that all nuclear power plants can come back. So with this, the assumption of the past nuclear energy program has been totally irrelevant. So that means the nuclear fuel cycle policy of Japan must be reviewed. And in this context, it is very important for us to see what will be the most relevant fuel cycle policy for Japan, both in terms of energy needs in Japan as well as in non-proliferation interests of international community.
So Nobu, just to put it into context for some of our listeners who may not be so familiar with nuclear energy, Japan was one of the top countries with nuclear energy after the United States and France. It had a closed fuel cycle, which means it was going to reprocess all the spent nuclear fuel that builds up and take the resulting plutonium and refashion that into nuclear fuel. The big issue now, though, is if no reactors are operating, where is Japan going with this? Its recent national decisions have been to keep this reprocessing program, and actually Japan has built up some plutonium, quite a lot of plutonium. So Nobu, can you tell us a little bit about where Japan's decisions are now with respect to nuclear energy and also with respect to this plutonium?
The Japanese government decided to maintain the fuel cycle program, but the problem is the fast breeder reactor, which actually reproduced plutonium, it's not working and it stopped. So even if the Rokkasho reprocessing plant separated the plutonium and accumulated, there is no actually concrete plan yet to consume plutonium except making a MOX fuel and burn it in the light water reactors. So some people are wondering why the Japanese government need to continue the fuel cycle program.
And why do we care about this plutonium?
Right. Obviously, plutonium could be used for making nuclear weapons. And if Japan has the stockpile of nuclear weapons without a specific plan to consume it in civil use, so then some of the, some countries or people in the international community are wondering why Japan is continuing the nuclear increasing nuclear stockpile.
The plutonium,
sorry,
not nuclear weapons, right? But the amount of plutonium for a weapon is really actually pretty small. It's about 8 kilograms, and Japan has what, 10 tons of this separated plutonium at home, and about 34 tons in France and Britain. So this is a big issue for the non-proliferation regime, at least.
Well, it is a very good amount. The stockpile of plutonium is not weapon grade, but for so some people said it is not suited to make bomb. But still, there are also arguments that whatever the types of plutonium would be, you should be able to make a bomb if you don't care about the their quality. So it is natural for the international community to be concerned about the stockpile of plutonium. And if Japan does not have a plan, concrete plan to consume it, then I still keep on making a stockpile of plutonium. I think the concern would be further sort of increased. So I think it is important for us to address this concern.
And it's not just a non-proliferation issue. We're not just concerned about how Japan is viewed around the world because it could actually use that plutonium, but also a nuclear security issue, right? And didn't Japan just make an announcement at the 2014 Nuclear Security Summit that it was sending material to the United States?
Right. So the Japanese government announced that they will send back the very pure plutonium, 300 kilograms of plutonium to the United States, which was originally used for the first critical assembly experimental facility. But then after the negotiation between United States and Japan, our government, Japanese government, decided to return it to the United States. And I think it's one of the sort of signs that the Japanese government is sort of loyal to the norms of non-proliferation and nuclear security. And so although Japanese government decided to continue the nuclear fuel cycle, but on the other hand, I think Japanese government is trying to be more loyal to the international norms of non-proliferation. But if Japan tried to eliminate these concerns or suspicions about the intention of its energy programs or nuclear policy, then I think that Japan needs to deal with the issue of plutonium stockpile. So Sharon, may I ask a question?
Of course.
So what is your sort of original interest in the Japan's nuclear program, in particular the fuel cycle program?
My interest comes from work that I've done on trying to reduce the risks of nuclear energy. And Japan is one of very few, actually it's the only non-nuclear weapon state that separates spent fuel and has built up these stockpiles of plutonium. So Japan has been a terrific leader in non-proliferation. It's been one of our strongest allies. It's been very progressive and taken strong policies. And so, but I think that these decisions about nuclear energy are deeply rooted in domestic, very domestic interests, political, legal, economic interests that are very hard for outsiders to understand. And so one of my goals in this project is to bring some of those issues to light. Japan obviously wants to do the right thing with regard to non-proliferation, but it's caught in a lot of ways by these ties from local and political and technical interests.
Yes, I actually agree with you that when we think about the Japan's decision on the fuel cycle program, it is important to take into account the various aspects of the policy decisions. In particular, as you said, the relationship between the local community which hosts the facilities and utilities as well as the government is a very difficult element of the decision on nuclear policy of Japan. So although for international community, the interest is more or less on the non-proliferation element of a fuel cycle, or in particular the stockpile of plutonium. But in order to deeply and thoroughly understand why Japan is choosing this direction and the policy, I think we need to understand this domestic element. But at the same time, I also hope that the Japanese government understand why international community is concerned about its policy and how they should overcome these concerns so that the Japanese government of Japan can have a most appropriate energy policy as well nuclear programs.
Right. I would just add that, it's not just Japan who faces trying to balance domestic against foreign priorities. Every country has that challenge. We may adopt certain policies because they make sense domestically and then realize that internationally, it's a disaster. There are many examples in the United States case. There's also one other thing that factors in here, and that is the security system or the status of relations in the region. So you have South Korea, you have China, you have North Korea. They're very complicated and actually kind of worsened relations over the last few years for a variety of reasons. But particularly in this fuel cycle issue, what happens in Japan has an impact on some of its neighbors. So that's the other element that I'd like to bring
This
in.
strategic environment in East Asia may be another important factor that we have to take into account. But one more thing, that is U.S.-Japan relations. In particular, the two countries need to renew the bilateral nuclear cooperation agreement in 2018. So how would you think that this plutonium issue or fuel cycle issue would affect? Probably that one of the agenda that we, when you think about the project.
Right. U.S. and Japan are very, very close allies. The agreement that was signed with Japan expires in 2018, but there's a clause that says it will continue indefinitely. Part of the problem is the situation's changed over the last 30 years. And so the U.S. sort of gave Japan a bit of a blank check and said, what you want to do with your fuel cycle is your business. Now, however, we're looking at a future where it's not clear what's going to happen with Japan's nuclear energy. Will they really need to reprocess the spent fuel? Where is it going to go? And so there are some who wonder, do we need to revisit that agreement? And that'll be a question that we'll be looking at over the next few years.
Right. On the Japanese side, there are some worries among the nuclear experts or the people in the nuclear policy community that there may be a very tough negotiation. If the negotiation must be done before the renewal of the bilateral agreement, and in particular, they are worrying whether the United States would request Japan to deal with the plutonium issues or fuel cycle issues. So it seems to me that on Japanese side, there is an interest to deepen the understanding on the Japanese intentions on the nuclear energy policy, then through the dialogue with the American counterparts. So I think this project is pretty much relevant in terms of preparing for groundwork for the renewal of U.S.-Japan bilateral nuclear cooperation agreement.
Absolutely.